In the quiet of a nursing home, Harold spent years in solitude, weighed down by the distance from his family and the pain of being left behind. But a simple video, made for his kids, might just be the key to turning it all around. With every visit, he gets one step closer to a fresh start. Are you ready for a story about forgiveness, reconciliation, and second chances? Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I'd love to hear. Let's dive in. Harold adjusted his glasses with trembling fingers as he stared at the landline on the table. The pale morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the nursing home, casting soft shadows on the worn-out furniture. He had memorized every detail of the phone, from the slightly rough texture of the plastic to the faded numbers worn away by time. It was a daily ritual, sitting on the common room couch, waiting, imagining the sound that would break the silence. The phone, however, never rang. Harold knew his kids were busy. David, the oldest, was a lawyer at a prestigious firm in New York. Lisa, the youngest, worked as a doctor at a bustling hospital in California. Harold told himself that the silence was inevitable, a natural consequence of their hectic lives. Still, the emptiness stung. That day, a persistent thought took him back to the past. He could see himself decades ago, in his military uniform, holding a small photo of his wife and kids. Every letter he received was a reason to keep going. He survived the war with his heart aching from homesickness, but also full of hope to come back home and build a life with his family. Harold snapped back to the present when he heard the sound of a chair scraping across the floor. An elderly woman with a hesitant gait passed by him, giving a polite wave. He smiled back, but his thoughts quickly returned to his kids. He remembered the day he sold the family house, a hard decision, but one he thought was necessary. He wanted to help Lisa pay for medical school and give David a chance to invest in his career. What he hadn't expected was the silence that followed. Visits became rare, calls grew shorter, until they stopped altogether. "Good morning, Harold," a cheerful voice broke his thoughts. It was Mary, a young caregiver, carrying a tray of cookies. "Good morning, Mary." Harold tried to smile, but his gaze returned to the phone. Mary noticed and furrowed her brow slightly, but decided not to press him. As she served tea to other residents, Harold let out a long sigh. He didn't say it aloud, but with each passing day, it became harder to hide the pain of abandonment. Harold's routine remained unchanged. Every day, at 10 in the morning, he sat in the same spot, doing the same things, waiting for the phone to ring. He told himself he was prepared for the loneliness, but something in his chest still tightened every time his gaze fell on the device. The other residents, who were used to seeing him like this, passed by with pitying glances, but no one dared to ask what was going on in his mind. Lunch was served right on time, but Harold couldn't focus on the meal. He stirred his food with a fork, staring blankly at the wall in front of him. The plate was in front of him, but his mind was somewhere else. That's when he decided to try once more. With a resigned sigh, he picked up the phone and dialed David's number, his oldest son. The call was quick, as usual. "Hey, Dad, how's it going over there?" came David's voice on the other end. David always started the conversations like this, but there was never time for a real conversation. I'm good. Just wanted to know how you're doing." "How's work?" Harold asked, trying to sound casual. He knew the conversation would be short, but he still felt the need to hear his son's voice, even if just for a few minutes. "Ah, you know how it is. Busy. Work, commitments, all that stuff. Listen, Dad, I really can't talk right now. I've got a meeting. Can we catch up later? Before Harold could even respond, David hung up the phone. Harold stared at the phone for a few seconds, as if expecting David to return to the line. But the silence crept back in, deeper than ever. He knew the promises of regular visits and calls, made years ago, had never been kept. Turning slowly in his chair, Harold saw Lisa, his youngest daughter, walking through the room. She was having an animated conversation with one of the other caregivers, and Harold watched her, as he always did, unnoticed. He had always been the devoted father, always trying to protect his kids from pain, but now he wondered if he had done enough to deserve just a little attention. When the clock in the room struck 3 p.m., Harold tried again, this time calling Lisa. The sound of the ringing felt slower than ever, as if the phone itself knew what was about to happen. Finally, the call was answered. "Hey, Daddy, how are you?" Lisa's voice sounded muffled, as if she was somewhere busy. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just wanted to know how you've been. How's the hospital?" Harold tried to hide the exhaustion in his voice, but the pain was becoming more and more visible. Lisa responded without really going into much detail. "It's fine, Dad. You know how things are around here. A lot of patients, a lot of work. I've got to go now. I need to finish up some things." And, just like David, the call was abruptly ended. Harold sat still, staring at the phone once more. He didn't want to admit it, but the loneliness was becoming unbearable. He leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes, feeling the weight of broken promises settling heavily on his shoulders. The next day, Harold was, as usual, in the common room of the home, sitting by the window. The sun was shining, but he couldn't help but notice how the light seemed weak, dull. The phone next to him was still silent, but something felt different that day. As he watched the other residents chatting or watching TV, something made him look over at Mary, the young caregiver who always brought him some company. Mary had a gift for seeing beyond the surface. She wasn't like the other caregivers who just rushed through their tasks, saying little or nothing. She always seemed genuinely interested, like she wanted to understand the people she took care of. Today, Mary was more attuned to what was happening around her, noticing how Harold was quieter than usual. She walked over and stopped next to him. "Good morning, Harold. How are you feeling today?" she asked with a soft smile. But her look wasn't just that of a professional. There was a genuine empathy in her eyes, something Harold hadn't seen in a long time. "I'm fine, Mary. Just a little tired." He smiled, but his voice carried a sadness he couldn't hide. Mary sat down next to him. "Is it okay if I sit here, or would you rather be alone?" she asked, already guessing the answer. Harold shook his head, waving his hand as if to say she could stay. "If you don't mind," Harold said with a deep sigh. Mary sat quietly for a moment, watching him. What bothered her wasn't just Harold's obvious loneliness, but something deeper, almost a silent desperation. It was like he was waiting for something, or someone. "You know, Harold," Mary began gently, "if you ever want to talk or just vent, I'm here. You don't have to wait for a special occasion. Sometimes all you need is someone to listen." Harold looked at her for a few seconds. He was tired, but at the same time, there was something about her that seemed to spark a glimmer of hope he thought he'd lost. I don't want to be a burden to anyone, Mary." His voice faltered for a moment, but he continued. I just miss hearing my kids' voices." Mary stayed silent, listening. "You raised them with so much love, Harold. They need to know how much you still care and how much this is affecting you." Harold slowly shook his head. "They're too busy to worry about me. I just wish they knew." There was a palpable sadness in those words, but Mary, unsure of how to ease Harold's pain, had an idea. Maybe she could do something to change the situation, or at least help. "What if I tried to get them to listen to you? Maybe a video. You could record a message for them, tell them how you feel, what you've been through, what you want to say from the heart." Harold looked at Mary with a mix of surprise and skepticism. Record a video? They'd never watch it. Mary smiled softly, trusting in the power of the gesture. "I can promise you, if you speak from the heart, someone will listen. And if your kids don't, someone else will. And sometimes that's enough to make a difference." Harold looked at the phone again, almost as if the device was the last link he had to the world. He wasn't sure what would come of the video, but something in Mary's expression made him reconsider. Maybe, if not for his kids, the gesture could ease some of the pain that had been eating away at him. He gave a small sigh, like the decision had already been made in his heart. "All right, I'll try." Mary smiled. "I know it'll be good, Harold. I'll be here to help." She got up, already thinking about how to organize the video recording, and Harold, for the first time in a long time, felt like there was something more waiting for him, something beyond the silence. In the following days, Mary carefully organized everything. She brought in a portable camera to the lounge with a soft light, and asked Harold to settle into the old leather chair by the window. The room was calm, and the sound of the wind rustling the leaves outside seemed to create a peaceful atmosphere. Harold sat with his hands in his lap, staring at the camera, but his gaze was distant. He wasn't sure how to begin, but Mary, noticing his hesitation, sat next to him, encouraging him with a smile. "You can start however you want, Harold," she said. "Just speak about whatever comes to mind, whatever you feel. It doesn't have to be perfect, just your truth." Hearing those simple words, Harold closed his eyes for a moment, trying to gather the words that had been stuck in his throat for so long. When he opened his eyes, he focused on the small screen of the camera, as if it held the opportunity to finally be heard, to say what he had never been able to. Harold began, his voice faltering at first, but slowly gaining strength. "I've always been a man of action, of hard work. When I came back from the war, the only dream I had was to take care of my family. Mary, my wife, and I always said we'd be a strong family, that we'd be together forever. I thought that, with time, our kids would understand how important it is to be there for each other, but time passes, and you find yourself alone." He paused, feeling the weight of his words, but also a light sense of relief in saying them out loud. "My kids, I love them more than anything in this world, but loneliness is something that swallows you in a way you don't even notice until you're at the bottom. And it's hard, so hard, to understand that they don't need you the way they used to. I just wanted a visit, a phone call, just to know that I'm still part of their lives." Harold felt his eyes burn, but he didn't stop. Something inside him was changing, a mix of anger and sadness, but also courage. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was truly speaking to his kids. It wasn't just another interrupted call or a shallow message, but a sincere plea. "If you ever watch this video, David, Lisa, know that I don't blame you. I know each of your lives is tough. I know that work, families, obligations, All of that takes up the space of who we are. But still, I'm your father, and I just want to know that I'm still important to you." The last sentence was said with more force than he expected. Harold stayed silent for a few seconds, letting the words hang in the air. He felt an indescribable lightness, like even if the video didn't solve anything, it was a way to release the pain he had been holding in. Mary, who had been quietly sitting next to him during the entire recording, smiled gently when she saw Harold's expression soften. He wasn't just waiting for a call that would never come. He was allowing himself to be heard in a way he never had before. "It's perfect, Harold," Mary said sincerely. "I'm sure someone will hear what you have to say." I I hope so." Harold smiled shyly, as if, for the first time, he was starting to believe his words could make a difference. Before turning off the camera, he looked at Mary, a look of gratitude on his face. "Thank you, Mary, for helping me find the words." Mary nodded. "You don't have to thank me, Harold. You found the words. I just did the easy part." The video was ready, but more importantly, Harold felt that something inside him had changed. Even without knowing if his kids would see it, he had finally shared his pain and his love with the world. In the following days, Mary carefully set everything up. She brought a portable camera into the living room with a soft light and asked Harold to sit in the old leather chair next to the window. The atmosphere was calm, and the sound of the wind rustling through the tree leaves outside seemed to help create a peaceful mood. Harold sat with his hands in his lap, staring at the camera, but his gaze was distant. He wasn't sure how to start, but Mary, noticing his hesitation, sat down next to him and encouraged him with a smile. "You can start however feels right, Harold," she said. "Just talk about whatever comes to your mind, what you're feeling. It doesn't have to be perfect, it's just your truth." Hearing those simple words, Harold closed his eyes for a moment, trying to gather the words that had been stuck in his throat for so long. When he opened his eyes, he focused on the small screen of the camera, as if that was his chance to finally be heard, to say what he'd never been able to. Harold began, his voice shaky at first, but gradually gaining strength. "I've always been a man of action, of hard work. When I came back from the war, the only dream I had was to take care of my family. Mary, my wife, and I always said we'd be a strong family, that we'd be together forever. I thought, with time, our kids would understand how important it is to be there for each other, but time passes, and you end up alone." He paused, feeling the weight of his words, but also a small sense of relief from saying them out loud. "My kids, I love them more than anything in this world. But loneliness is something that swallows you up in a way you don't realize until you're deep down. And it's tough, real tough, to accept that they don't need you the way they used to. I just wanted a visit, a call, just to know I'm still part of their lives." Harold felt his eyes burn, but he didn't stop. Something was shifting inside him, a mix of anger and sadness, but also courage. He felt like, for the first time in a long time, he was really talking to his kids. It wasn't just another missed call or a superficial text. It was a heartfelt plea. If you ever watch this video, David, Lisa, know that I don't blame you. I know life's tough for each of you. I know work, families, obligations, all that takes up the space of who we are. But still, I'm your dad, and I just want to know that I still matter to you. The last sentence came out stronger than he expected. Harold sat in silence for a few seconds, letting the words hang in the air. He felt an indescribable lightness, like even though the video wasn't a solution, it was a way to release the pain he'd been holding on to. Mary, who had been quiet beside him the whole time, smiled softly when she saw Harold's expression soften. He wasn't just waiting for the call that would never come anymore. He was letting himself be heard in a way he never had before. "It's perfect, Harold," Mary said sincerely. "I'm sure someone's going to hear what you've got to say." I I hope so." Harold smiled shyly, like for the first time he was starting to believe his words could make a difference. Before turning off the camera, he looked at Mary, a look of gratitude on his face. "Thanks, Mary, for helping me find the words." Mary nodded. "No need to thank me, Harold. You're the one who found the words. I just did the easy part." The video was ready, but more importantly, Harold felt like something inside him had shifted. Even though he wasn't sure if his kids would ever see it, he had finally shared his pain and his love with the world. The week dragged on, like it always does, but for Harold, there was something different in the air. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he felt a subtle sense of relief. His daily chats with Mary had become more frequent, and she kept encouraging him to think of other ways to cope with the loneliness. Even though the phone was still silent and the visits from his kids hadn't happened yet, something inside him felt changed. He was starting to believe that, in some way, the gesture he made in the video had a purpose, even if it wasn't for his kids. Just the fact that he had openly spoken about his feelings gave him a sense of connection to something bigger, more human, that went beyond blood ties. But deep down, he still hoped that video would be seen, that David and Lisa would, in some way, be moved by his words. It was a Friday afternoon when, to his surprise, the phone rang. The sound, which had once seemed so distant and unlikely, now felt almost magical. Harold's heart raced. He grabbed the phone with trembling hands and answered, almost not believing someone was finally on the other end. "Hello? Hey, Dad." David's voice came through, and Harold felt a wave of emotions. There was something different in his tone, a softness that hadn't been there in their recent talks. I watched the video you made." Harold's world stopped for a second. The video. He'd really seen it. "You saw it?" Harold could barely keep the tremble out of his voice. "Yeah, Dad. I didn't realize how bad you were feeling. I'm sorry I didn't notice sooner." David's voice was low, almost like he was apologizing, but there was something more there. Maybe regret. Harold went silent for a few seconds. The emotion was so overwhelming he didn't know what to say. But before he could find the right words, David went on. "I know I'm not the best son, Dad. I've been so caught up in my work. I never realized how much it was affecting you. I didn't know you missed me so much." Harold's heart tightened. He never thought he'd hear those words from David. The pain of years of silence started to fade with the sincerity in those words. He felt a mix of relief and a new hope, a spark that, for the first time, seemed to light up. I wanted you to know, David. I love you. I'll always love you. But the loneliness, it's hard to carry, son." Harold took a deep breath, trying to hold back tears. "I just wanted to know that I'm still part of your life." "You always will be, Dad. I promise. I'll do whatever it takes to be there more. Things will be different from now on. I'll visit you, and we'll talk more. I love you, Dad." David's words, though simple, were loaded with deep meaning. Harold knew the change wouldn't happen overnight, but what more could he ask for than a start? The pain wouldn't disappear in a day, but he felt like something had broken, and for the first time he had been heard. "I love you too, son. I knew one day you'd understand." The silence that followed was comfortable. David was there, in some way, and Harold knew things wouldn't be the same anymore. He wasn't waiting for the phone to ring anymore. He'd already heard what he needed to hear, and maybe, finally, he'd be able to find himself again, with his kids and the life that, until now, seemed to have forgotten about him. The weeks that followed flew by, like time, which was once weighed down with pain and waiting, had found a new rhythm. David really kept the promise he made to Harold. He called more often and, more importantly, started visiting his dad at the nursing home whenever he could. The visits weren't long, but with each one Harold felt his heart grow lighter. Something had shifted in their relationship. Lisa, though more hesitant at first, also joined in the effort to communicate with her dad. Always so absorbed in her work at the hospital, she finally seemed to realize that physical absence wasn't the only way to be present. She started calling Harold every afternoon, and their conversations, once short and impersonal, were now warmer. Harold didn't know exactly what was happening, but he felt like what seemed like a simple gesture of recording a video had sparked something much bigger. Not only had he touched his kids' hearts, but he had also rediscovered what it meant to be heard, to be seen after so many years of feeling invisible. The loneliness was still there, but it didn't feel as overwhelming. During one of David's visits, something special happened. He brought his wife and young kids to meet Harold. The nursing home, with its peeling walls and quiet hallways, didn't seem like the ideal place for a family gathering, but right there, in that simple space full of untold stories, something was being rebuilt. David, with his usual smile, walked up to Harold and said, "Dad, I want you to meet your grandkids." Harold looked at the kids and for the first time in a long time felt warmth in his chest. He, who had felt pushed aside, was now surrounded by a new generation of his family. Harold's grandkids, with their curious eyes and boundless energy, began to interact with him. One of them, a little boy of just 5, smiled at him, making Harold forget for a few seconds how much time was passing. He was back at the center of his family, and no matter how deep the scars of the past, he knew those marks didn't have to define the future. "They're so much like you, Dad," David said, watching Harold play with the grandkids. Harold smiled with a lump in his throat, touching one of the boys' heads. "I always hoped you'd see me like this, as someone who has something to teach, to share." Lisa, standing next to him, looked at her dad and said, "We never realized how much we were missing, Dad. I just didn't know how to be part of your life, but I'm trying now. I hope there's still time to make up for the lost time." Lisa's words hit Harold in a way he couldn't explain. He never expected a revolution in his life, but little by little, the simple fact of being heard was proving to be transformative. Maybe making up for lost time was impossible, but what mattered now was the present. With every new visit from his kids and grandkids, Harold felt more connected to life. The small joys, once muffled by sadness and loneliness, now seemed to blossom like shy flowers after the rain. He felt that, even though the circumstances weren't perfect, he was being reconnected with what mattered most. One peaceful afternoon, as he talked to Mary, Harold reflected on what had changed. "I don't think I can forget everything that happened, Mary, but I've learned that there's always something to be done, a chance for change. Even when the pain feels unbearable, life can offer moments of redemption." Mary smiled, as she always did, with an expression that reflected the understanding of someone who had seen this kind of transformation before. "That's true, Harold. Sometimes it's the little things that matter most, and in the end, you're building something new without needing to erase what happened." Harold looked out the window at the horizon, where the sun was slowly setting. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment he felt more whole, more present. He knew there was still much to be done, many conversations to have, many gestures of affection to share. But the most important thing was that he had learned to allow himself to live again, with his family around him and his heart a little lighter. Loneliness still existed, but it no longer ruled his life. He had found in the unexpected a chance to rewrite his destiny. The phone rang again, but this time Harold didn't feel anxious. He'd gotten used to the routine of calls and visits, and even though he knew loneliness could strike at any moment, he felt like he was in a different phase of life. The last call he got was from Lisa, saying she was on her way for another visit. David had already done his part and was heading to his in-laws' house that weekend. But Lisa, who was now making more of an effort to stay in touch, was determined to spend more time with him. "Dad, get ready. I'm coming with the kids, and I've got a surprise for you," she said, her voice full of excitement. Harold didn't know what to expect, but he felt a quiet joy as he realized how life suddenly seemed more purposeful. He adjusted his wheelchair and looked out the window of the nursing home's lounge, where the trees swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. He felt good, comfortable in his skin, and even though old age was relentless, he had found peace in his days. When Lisa arrived, she brought a big cardboard box with her. The kids were excited, jumping around the box, eager for Harold to open it. He smiled, curious, but also a little intrigued. "Dad, this is for you," Lisa said, handing him the box. "I remembered what you said in the video. I know things haven't been easy, but I want you to know we're here. I've always been here. I just didn't know how to be a part of your life the right way. Now I want to really try." Harold didn't know exactly what to say, but her words hit him hard. He had already forgiven Lisa in his heart, but now, hearing her sincerity, he felt that their healing process had truly begun. He lifted the lid of the box, and when he saw what was inside, he was speechless. Inside the box was a photo album, carefully put together with pictures from his life with Mary, their young children, and special moments he didn't even remember anymore. The photos, old and dusty, looked like precious relics from the past, now resurfacing to remind him of his family's story. Each photo, each memory, seemed to vibrate with new energy, as if time had folded and brought back everything he thought he had lost. "I thought this might be something symbolic, a way for us to remember that, no matter how tough it's been, we're a family," Lisa said, her voice soft and filled with emotion. Harold looked at her, his eyes welling up, and finally found his words. "This is more than I could have hoped for, Lisa. I didn't know I needed this, but now I see that you understand me. Thank you so much." The photo album wasn't just a collection of memories from the past, it was a bridge between him and his children, a symbol of what could still be lived. He felt that, even with the challenges of old age and the missteps along the way, there was still so much to value. The kids gathered around and started looking at the photos with Harold, pointing at the old faces and asking about the stories behind each picture. The conversation flowed naturally, and for the first time, Harold didn't feel like a stranger in his own story. He was present, he was there, and everything around him was somehow unexpectedly falling into place. Time passed quickly as the evening set in. Lisa and the kids had to leave, but before they went, Lisa hugged Harold tighter than ever. "I promise I won't disappear again, Dad. We're back, for real." "I know, sweetheart, I know," Harold replied, feeling the weight of her words, and at the same time, the relief of knowing that everything he had always wanted was finally within reach. That night, Harold sat in his armchair, the photo album on his lap. He felt a deep peace, stronger than the loneliness that had followed him for so many years. The nursing home, the silence that used to bother him, were no longer symbols of abandonment. He had won back his family, and that was all he needed to keep moving forward. There were still challenges ahead, and old age wouldn't let him be the man he once was. But Harold knew more than ever that true wealth lay in the small things, the visits, the conversations, and the will to start over even after so many years. Life couldn't be erased, but with the right people by his side, Harold learned that there's always time for a new beginning. Winter had arrived with its icy breeze, covering the streets and trees with a soft layer of snow. But the chill, which used to feel like it cut straight to Harold's bones, now seemed a little milder. The nursing home was quiet that Saturday morning, with the sound of the heating machines humming in the background and the distant murmur of other residents chatting. Harold sat in his chair, staring out at the white landscape, when a sense of contentment and acceptance washed over him. He knew his life wasn't perfect, but for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. Lisa's visit that morning was warm, but she had something important to say. She sat down next to him, looking more serious than usual, and Harold knew whatever she had to say wasn't going to be trivial. "Dad," Lisa started, gently taking his hand, "I know things haven't been easy, and even though we've made some important progress, we still have a long way to go. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, we're here, and we're going to keep trying to be a family. I'm stepping away from some things to focus on our relationship." Harold looked at her with a peaceful smile. "You've always done the best you could, Lisa. Doesn't matter how long it took. What matters now is that we're here together." "I know, Dad. I just wanted you to know that even with all my mistakes, I've always loved you. Maybe it took me a while to realize it, but I love you. I want you to be sure that you're not alone." Lisa's words were like a soft breeze, full of warmth and sincerity. Harold felt his heart calm even more with her words. He'd never wanted more than this, being seen, being heard, being loved. And now, despite all the distance and mistakes from the past, he finally felt complete. "You're with me, and that's what matters. I needed time to understand what I meant to you guys. Now, I know I can move forward, at peace, knowing we're rebuilding everything." Lisa smiled, a simple but genuine smile. She got up and kissed him on the forehead. "And we're going to keep going. It's going to be tough, but we're in this together, Dad, forever." Winter slowly passed, and with it, Harold's days of loneliness. He found new ways to keep his mind and time occupied. He joined more activities at the nursing home, interacted with the other residents, and even started writing about his memories in a journal he kept hidden in his drawer. The words flowed easily, like writing was a reflection of his own soul, now lighter. When spring came with the smell of flowers in the air and the days getting longer, Harold felt like his journey was in a place of balance. There was no more frantic search for redemption or forgiveness. He had found a place where he felt accepted, loved, and maybe most importantly, where he had learned to forgive himself. One sunny afternoon, while flipping through the pages of the photo album Lisa had given him, he looked at the family portrait. Of all those moments that once seemed lost, he smiled. Life hadn't been easy, but he knew the love that had been built, even with mistakes and distance, was what really mattered. And with that, he allowed himself to rest, knowing that, at last, he had found the peace he'd been searching for.